All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations for Murox ASP.NET with C# 2015 6th edition. We're up to Chapter 7 of Part 2. Chapter 7 is on how to use the validation controls. We've looked at the validation controls previously. All right, so in this chapter, as you can see, our objectives, our applied objectives, are given the data validation requirements of a web form, basically to use the correct validation control or controls to do what we want to do. Provide for the use of unobtrusive validation by using NuGet. We've talked about that before. In our knowledge objectives, explain how ASP.NET processes validation controls, describe the use of the isValid property of a page, describe the use of each of the 6 validation controls that ASP.NET provides, describe the use of the control to validate, display text error messages, or error message I should say, and enable properties of any validation control, describe how unobtrusive validation is used, distinguish between the processing that's done for a custom validator and the processing done for other validation controls, and finally describe the use of the validation summary control. So, I've actually gotten into friendly arguments with people over this slide, believe it or not, because it says here the validation controls provided by ASP.NET. Technically, the first 5 are validation controls. The last one is not a validation control, rather it displays a summary of error messages from the 5 above. So, looking at these, the good news is most of them are fairly intuitive based on their name. Required field validator, if you set that, that means if you don't put a value in for that field, you'll get an error message. The compare, oftentimes you use that for things like if you've got a password and then a re-enter password type of thing where you can compare two things. It doesn't have to be like that. You can compare something. So let's assume, for example, that you've got, you've got something where a person has to enter something and it has to be compared. It's not a password, but maybe it's something else. All right, maybe you've got only 1 or 2 valid product codes or something like that where you can compare. A range validator, you might say that a person must must make between $50,000 and $65,000 a year. So with a range validator, you could set the minimum to $50,000 and the maximum to $65,000, for example. Regular expression is kind of a neat one because with regular expressions, there are a bunch of built-in validations for things like phone numbers, social security numbers, and there's a few other ones, zip codes, I think. And you can also do your own regular expression validations. The custom, sometimes you might have maybe your product number is set up in a real weird way. You know, some numbers, some letters, some numbers, some letters, etc. in a weird pattern. So you can set up your own custom validation, and I already mentioned the validation summary to you. All right, so they show you some code here, and this code, it says typical processing for a page that contains validation controls. So in other words, if page.isValid, that will go and it will check any of these validators that have been set. If all pass, then you'll come in and do this code. And that's exactly what this is saying. Now, if the browser has JavaScript enabled, the validation controls do their validating on the client. That way, the validation is done and any error messages are displayed without the page having to be posted back to the server. It's a waste of time not to enable JavaScript because if you send your code directly to the server and there are errors in the code, all the server has to do is send it back to the client and let them know that there are errors. So oftentimes, in a well-written web application, you will validate on the client and you will run all these validations. If it all validates, you will send it to the server and then you will perform the same validations on the server. All right? You never want to let garbage, especially potentially hurtful garbage, into the system. So validation is done both on the client and on the server. Validation is always done when you click a button whose causes validation property is set to true. Validation is also done on the client when the focus leaves an input control. The exception is the required field validator. It only does that when you click the button whose causes validation property is set to true. Now the big thing on that is, if you've got 5 fields and each one's required, there's nothing that's going to say that you're going to fill them out in order. You might be in the first field and just tab to the second, and then do the third, then tab back to the first for whatever reason. However, if you're in a required field, so let's say I've got email address, okay, and I start to type in an email address, in all I've got in there, let's just say, is the required field. If I'm in there and I type, then I remove it and I move off to another field, then typically the required field validator will hit. So validation is done on the client and it's done on the server. If the validation control finds invalid data, the isValid property will be set to false. And the isValid property, that's for the control. Then the isValid property of the page will also be set to false. And again, you can test these as shown right here in your code. If you want to only perform validation on a server, you can set the enable client script properties to false. Then the JavaScript won't be generated. Again, you typically do not want to do that. I'm not saying you never want to do that. I'm saying you typically do not want to do that. All right, so we started this by talking about these validators. So the required field validator, the compare validator, the range validator, the regular expression validator, and the custom validator. They all share these properties. When you just drag a validator out, they don't do a darn thing because you have to set the control you want them to validate. So that's the ID of the control to be validated. The display determines how the error message is displayed. If it's set to static, which is the default, it always sets room on your form to display the error message, whether it's displayed or not. If you set it to dynamic, which I think should be the default, but it's not, it only allocates space when an error occurs. The text is the message that's displayed in the validator. The error message is the message that's displayed in the validation summary control if one is set. The CSS class is any class that you've applied to the validator's message. So if you had an error class which set the color to red and the font weight to bold, for example, you saw that. We set that up accordingly for our future value program that we did earlier. Enabled indicates whether the validation control is enabled or not. Enable client script indicates whether or not the validation is done on the client. Set focus on error indicates whether the focus will be moved to the control if it's invalid. And validation group indicates which group the validation control is a part of. So if we look here, these are where you set all that stuff. So you bring out your particular validation control and then you go to the properties window and set all this stuff. Now, what's important is, remember when you do this, it's going to work with JavaScript. So when we look at this, if you remember this is one of the more important parts of this chapter. That is, if I come through here and let's say I'm going to do a file, new, and I'm going to do a new website. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to cancel out. If I do empty, if I choose empty, remember all that gets created for me is a web.config file. That's it. So that means I have to add my own JavaScript validation. If I choose the ASP.NET Web Forms site, then that JavaScript validation will be built in, like we have it here, where we'll have our scripts inside of here. All right? But what the author's getting to here is if you do an empty project, you're going to have to come in then yourself, and you will have to come in and add, and what the way it's typically done is to use NuGet, where, remember, when you use NuGet, it's not difficult to do. You right mouse click on the name of your project, you go to Manage NuGet Packages, and you know, again, it's going to tell me to save here. All right, so I'm saving. I don't want to save. This is what's screwing all this stuff up, is having to do these saves because it's saving it to the wrong place, etc. But I can go back to my desktop, to my ASP.NET folder. Should be there in the desktop. There it is. To my, I don't want ASP.NET Test. No, I don't even know where I am right now, so. I don't know where I saved this, so that's why I think this is getting all hosed up. Probably. I'm not even sure. I mean, it could be in my C drive, under program files here, under Muroc. Thought it was there. Under here, and under student download, and under book applications. I'm not sure, like I said, I guess that is where it is. Here, and then save, boom. It says it already exists. Do I want to replace it? I really don't, but I'm going to anyway, which may have screwed my thing up. But now I can right mouse click, choose Manage NuGet Packages, bring this up. Typically when you do this, you'll click Browse, and if I want to bring up jQuery, then it's the ASP.NET.ScriptManager.jQuery. And you see when I do that, it brings it up right here. So if I click here, I can tell it to install. It should already be installed. But that's the way that I would have to do it if indeed I had started my, in fact, let's do that. Let's do a file. We'll close the solution, okay? And do I want to save it? No. So I'm going to do a file, new, website. I'm going to choose an empty website. This is on my desktop. And I'm just going to call this garbage because I want to remove it later. All right, so all I get is the web config. So I can come in here, right mouse click, choose add, new item, add myself a new web form. Boom. All right, now that I've got the web form, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to right mouse click, choose Manage NuGet Packages. In fact, just to show you before I even do that, let's not do that yet. All right, so if I come in here, and let's say that I want to put in, I don't know, a text box. No, let's just put in a button. Okay? And you can see I've got an unbelievably simple thing here. I'm going to double click on this, and what I want to say is something like, can I say message? Maybe it won't give me do a message box.show. I'll do this. Okay, I'm going to come back to here, and I'm going to come back to that button that I just put here. And I wouldn't typically do this over here, but I'm just going to add a text box. All right. And when I click the text box, or the button, I want the text box dot text. I want that to be equal to hello. Kind of silly, but just so you get the idea. All right. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to run the program. And it worked. Well, I guess it's because I'm not doing any validation. That's probably why. So let's come back. So that worked. Interesting. But it worked. So let's come back here. And let's put in, for here, let's go back to our source, and let's put in a required field validator. This is good, because now you can see this stuff in action. All right. So I'm going to go over and view my toolbox. All right. And yeah, it says there's no usable controls. Let's go back to here and let's go to design mode. Okay. So showing me there's no usable controls. So that's because I'm still running this. There we go. And now we want to come in and we want to go under our validation and we want to bring in a required, no, I'm sorry, a required field validator. So I'm going to drag that in. There it is. And looking at it in here, again, now I want to tell it what field to validate. All right, so again, control to validate. I want to choose text box 1. My error message will be, you must enter a value in this text box. Boom. Let's run this again. Click. Now we get that error. All right, that's what I wanted to show you. And it says we get the error because our unobtrusive validation is not set correctly. There are 3 ways that we could set this unobtrusive validation so we didn't get this error message. There are 3 ways. All right. The first way, we can come in here and we can literally set it in our code. So we can set it in our code window. That was shown earlier. I don't worry, I'm not going to do that anyway. We can come into our web config file and we can set it in here. To me, the easiest, most natural way to set this is, now that I've got all my stuff here, is to right mouse click on the name of the project, go to Manage NuGet Properties, again, click Browse, type in, as we said before, ASP.NET.ScriptManager.jQuery. All right, click right here, install it, telling me it's going to install it, click OK. There it added those files. So it added the scripts folder with all the files in it. So what's different? Now if I can close this now because I'm done with that particular thing, so I can get rid of that. Now when I run my program though, and I click button without putting a value in there, I don't get my error message because I've added my unobtrusive validation. Okay? Now again, I can, if I want to, I can come in here now just so you see this. I'm trying to be complete here. So I can come in here and remember, if I want to, I can come in and I shouldn't do it at the top of my program probably, but I will anyway. And that is, I'm going to come into my default, go into my source. In fact, let's do this. We're going to right mouse click on here. We're going to choose Add, New Folder, and I'm going to call this CSS. All right, then I'm going to right mouse click in here, choose Add, and I'll choose Style Sheet down here, and we'll just call it Styles. All right, there's my style sheet, and I want to add a class called Error. And I want that error class to be a color red. Oops, not a. And I want it to have a font weight of bold. All right, why did I do that? Well, now I can come back into here, go back into my source code. I'm not prettying this up as I've shown you earlier. So there's my field validator, etc. But we will take this and put it on multiple lines just so you can see everything here. So you can see what we've set here. We've set our ID, and I just gave it the default one, so I could have called this, let's just say input. Okay, run it equals server, so this and this mean it's a server-side control. This is the control we're validating. This is the error message we want to have pop up. And finally, we want to set the CSS class equal to error. Now, once we've done all that and I save and run it again, now this should come up and the message should be red and bolded. And it's not. Why not? I love that when I try showing you a point and then it doesn't work. Oh, I know why. And hopefully you figured it out yourselves. I did not add the style sheet. So remember, in my head section here, should put it, this is garbage example. But in my head section, I should take that CSS file that I created and drag it in. There it is. Now we're linking to it. Now I can virtually guarantee that when I click this, it'll come up and it'll be red and bolded. And it is. All right. I like this because now I'm showing you this stuff. So I've now shown you, all right, now I've now shown you this. Okay, I've shown you all this stuff in here, so you must enter a value in here. Okay, well, let's go on, because what's next are how to use the different validators. So each one is going to be shown in here, and that's going to be about the next 10 to 15 pages. So I'll tell you what, let me put these in, so I'm going to add to this. So I'm going to quit my run here. Stop the run, go back to design mode so it looks a little nicer, and let's add some stuff here. All right, so let's bring in, I'm just going to bring in a bunch of stuff. I'm doing this on the fly, so let's see. We'll put in here, we'll put in a label, and after the label, we'll put in a text box, and for the label here, that'll just say name. Kind of stupid because I should have like first name, last name, but that's fine. Password, and we're going to put in another text box, which will have to be of type password. So let's put in another text box. Re-enter. Password. Again, you can see I'm not prettying this up. Okay, I would typically use CSS so this stuff lined up nicely, or I'd put it in a table, which if I had thought about it a little bit, would have probably done. Let's put in here salary with a text box, and let's put in here, so we've got name, password, salary. How about phone number, and again another text box. All right, and I'm going to do something right now you probably shouldn't do, although it doesn't hurt. That is, I'm going to come back in here, or I've got all this good stuff that I just created, and I'm going to come in and quickly create a table. All right, and table row, and table header, and that'll be name. And table data, and that'll be this. So I'll call it text box name. All right, so there's my first row. Don't worry, this will all get fixed in just a matter of moments. All right, let me just copy this. I'm just going to make it easy. So this will say password. And let's see, I'm going to start getting rid of this stuff because I won't need it anymore. And we'll bring this in. So this will be, again, our password. Oops. So we'll call that text box password. All right. So that'll be at the end of that row. Let's bring in another one. And this will be the re-enter password. Along with this. There's my TDs. I need a TD there. Let's just do this. And let me remove that TD that we just put in, the ending one there. And this will be TXT re-enter password. All right, again, I'm doing this all off the top of my head, which is terrible. Let's put in another row. Oops. I've got a very peculiar keyboard here that that's not good. That's better. Okay. So salary. And this will be the salary. And finally, one more row. And in there, we will put in again our if this runs without me having to change anything for making mistakes, it'll be a miracle. Phone number. And again, we'll come in here. Let me get rid of all this now. And we'll add this. That will be our TD with our phone number. All right, now I made that really in a hurry, but I'm hoping it was going to look a little nicer now. Let's go into design mode. Yeah, that looks better. All right, error creating in the phone number. That's not too bad though. All right, I'm going to get rid of this particular field here and that validator, and I'd like to take this button, hit enter a couple times. Oops. Well, I'd like to put that button back in there, so let's just, we'll bring the button back there. I got to fix the phone number. That's not bad, though, that I made all those changes and didn't screw more up than I did. So, come back into here. Let's look at that phone number. I'll go back to source mode here. D equals text box phone number. If this is in quotation marks, the marks must match. Oh, was that all? Okay. Design. There we go. All right, so let's come back to here. I don't know why it's doing what it's doing here, but I want to grab, let's do it. We'll grab this button. Let's grab it and do this in source mode. All right, so I'm going to grab the button that's here, and I'm going to paste it in after our table. So we'll put in a couple BR tags and paste that button in. And we'll call that, because we're trying to be good here, we'll say submit, and we'll have the text on the button say submit. All right, this is finally looking the way I want it to. It's much better than it was. All right. Now I want to show you how to use all of these things, including the validation summary. So first off, I could pause the recording to do this, and I'm at 30 minutes, so I'm going to. All right, I'm going to go back and I'm going to clean this up And I'll come back and discuss this with you in the next lecture. See you then.